Hello, I'm Rita Princi Hubbard, and I'm speaking to you all the way from Adelaide in South Australia. I'm delighted to be presenting at the Learning Innovation Festival, and my topic is the neuroscience approach to learning and well-being. Let's start with a quote from one of the grandmasters. Great things are done by a series of small things brought together. No matter what our background, our profession, our experience, and our knowledge, it's critical that we all work together to assist students and their teachers as we all move forward towards this new era in education. My Firestarter is going to bring together multi-aspects of previous research to investigate this new paradigm of neuroscience, psychology, and education, and how it impacts on student and teacher well-being. My background is that I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been working in this area for over 20 years. And part of my work is that I work in education with teachers and students, providing workshops about what is happening from a neuroscience perspective in order for teachers to understand students' reactions, their emotional reactions, but also how it impacts on their learning. It also informs teachers about what is happening for themselves so that they're more aware of their reactions when they're teaching. I believe in this model so much that I founded a company called the Institute for Neuroscience in Education, where I organise conferences bringing together like-minded people. Our next one will be next year in 2021. I also present overseas and around Australia on this topic, and I'm currently researching in a PhD this very important topic. There is a paradigm shift which is changing from focusing solely on cognitive development more to the impact of the environment and how that can then affect emotional development and learning. Steering away from a traditional fear-based approach where perhaps children are put on the spot or the focus is very much on student performance. This is more looking at how to create a thriving-based approach where students are learning to have fun in their environment, feel connected to their teachers, and teachers feel safe in their environment, understanding what those emotional and social needs are, and when they're met, we find that students are then more able to engage with their learning and their performance actually can increase. Student well-being is really a sustainable state of positive mood and attitude, resilience, and satisfaction with themselves, being more able to have healthy relationships and enjoy their experiences at school. When we focus on student well-being, we're not doing it at the expense of performance. We're actually assisting the child to then enhance their learning experience in all ways, physically, socially, emotionally, and critically, academically. We are not sacrificing performance in order to ensure well-being. It's through well-being that the child feels safe to be able to learn. Now, teacher well-being is critical for student well-being. It can actually predict lower depression in students in the future. It mitigates associations between poverty and low classroom engagement. And teachers' mental health and well-being has significant advantages and benefits for students' social and emotional development and well-being, including their learning achievements. It's overall, it covers all areas of health. Attachment is critically important. In my PhD, I'm actually creating an intervention for teachers following neuroscience principles under this new paradigm. And we know that how parents attach to their parents will impact on how they attach to their children. Children who have insecure attachments to their parents may then have insecure attachments with their teachers, or perhaps not be trustful of a teacher, or perhaps become too close to a teacher, really relying on the teacher. This is why it's critical in the intervention that I'm proposing that when teachers have training in these aspects, they'll be more aware of what's happening. And critically, now the research is showing how a teacher attaches to their parents will also impact on how they then attach to students. This is critical information that I believe needs to be shared with all teachers. The way the brain learns is that it connects. It creates networks of neurons that connect together as we learn new information. However, as soon as we feel even just a little bit uncomfortable, as our survival is compromised in any way, learning stops. And instead, the survival systems of the brain are activated And so we either will have a flight, fight, or freeze response. We need to be aware that children are not hardwired. They need a healthy environment, healthy relationships to develop self-control and emotional regulation. And they need adults to be able to teach them to do so through their own self-regulation and well-being. A critical area of science is epigenetics, which shows that positive experiences and positive relationships, as well as negative experiences, can affect the mark on genes. It actually affects genetic material, and these early years experiences are critical for how these genes are then expressed in the future. This is why there's such an emphasis now in the research about the importance of the student-teacher relationship, particularly for those students where there is an insecure parent-child attachment. When we understand neuroprinciples, we realize that the brain develops from the bottom up, inside out. It starts with those primitive areas of the brainstem, which is responsible for breathing and heart rate, really for keeping us alive. It's fully developed at birth and fully functional. The limbic system, or the more emotional part of the brain, is fully developed at birth, but only partly functional. It becomes fully functional at 3 years of age. And this is why the environment is so critical. A healthy environment will then help a child achieve that sense of safety, and they'll be able to connect emotionally. Otherwise, if it's compromised, children can then have a quicker reaction to stress. And the last part of the brain to develop is the cortical brain, or the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is not fully developed till 25 years of age. It's where we make decisions, where we communicate from. And it's vitally important to be aware again that the environment and the people that the children are around will help this brain to develop through adolescence and into adulthood. Now, when we process information, it enters through the thalamus, which is in the limbic system, and then it checks, is this information safe or dangerous? It does that with all incoming information. It's a very fast process at 50 milliseconds. However, if there is a stressor that the child has encountered, it will then activate a stress response. If the brain determines that the incoming information is safe, it will then activate a different process which allows the prefrontal cortex to engage with the information, and that occurs at 500 to 600 milliseconds. It's a slower process. The brain has to be satisfied that the incoming information is safe before it can concentrate. And in the classroom, this will then enable a child to engage with their learning. If the child has, however, encountered stressful experiences, that means that their survival system is more activated, which can interfere with their learning. The way the brain learns is that initially, when a new activity is being learned, let's take the activity of reading. When a child is first introduced to reading, the interaction between the neurons is very young, it's very new. As the child learns to read more, there's more activity so that the neurons are interacting, sharing chemicals. As the more that the child learns to read, the more chemicals are transferred. And what happens is that these neurons make extra chemicals that are needed, which means there'll be a debris. And so the astroglia come and glue these neurons together because they feed off that debris. And of course, the more the child learns to read, and obviously as they progress through adolescence and even into adulthood, we now have strong networks for reading. We just have to pick up a book and that system then activates. But this is also true for anything that is traumatic or fear-based, or if a child feels uncomfortable or it doesn't feel safe, doesn't have a sense of belonging, strong neural connections can be formed, which means that the student is then more likely to avoid that learning or to have big reactions when they're confronted with that learning. So the brain has the ability to create adaptive capabilities through healthy relationships, but unfortunately, unfavorable incidents can actually affect brain structure, cardiovascular, immune system, meaning that the student is more likely to become unwell and just activates an overall stress response. There's a mirror neuron effect that can occur, and these are vital components that I'm including in my intervention so that teachers are aware that critical areas of the brain are connected depending on how they're feeling and their behaviour, which can be mirrored by the student, and that the student's behaviour and emotions can be mirrored by the teacher. And what a student believes that a parent or teacher thinks about him or her will greatly impact their motivation, their efficiency, and their general well-being. This is why it's really important for teachers to be aware that children that have experienced trauma will have a faster amygdala activation, which means they will react much more quickly to anything stressful than children who have not had stress and trauma in their life. As a result, it may seem that they react quickly. They go from 0 to 100 in half a second, but it's actually because they're wired to react quickly for safety. The hippocampus, where we store new information, which then gets transferred as we sleep, particularly during dream state, is actually smaller for children that had experienced trauma or stress, which means that they'll have slower brain growth, less grey matter, which will affect their learning. Again, important components in training, but for teachers to be aware. So the model that I'm proposing is that the more that an educator learns to self-regulate and focus on their well-being, the more then they'll be able to assist students to self-regulate, and then the student will be more able to do this on their own. Unfortunately, the old models focus a lot on the student, this part here. How does the student react the way they do, or why do they react the way they do? How can we support them? Or is there a reason why they're doing this? Is there a diagnosis maybe that needs to be given? Is there a non-compliance issue? How do we change the child's behaviour? How do we control the child's behaviour? Whereas this model was saying it starts over here. We can replace educator with adult. The more an adult self-regulates, the more they will be able to assist a child, young person, to self-regulate, and then that young person will learn to self-regulate on their own. So we need to be aware that the first part of the process is that we need to regulate first, calm the brain. We need to help the student through breathing exercises, through moving them, because we know when we move them, the cortisol will decrease. Then connect emotionally, be in their presence, do something safe, do something fun, do something enjoyable, because it is only then that the brain reintegrates and the whole brain is now active, connected to the body, and the child is more able to learn and listen. If we start by just talking to the child and wanting answers, it's not going to work, because that safety area of the brain is active. But this is true for teachers as well. Need to be mindful that if, as an adult, our safety part of the brain, our survival brain is active, we're not going to be able to relate to the child either. And we will then also perhaps come across very harshly or want to avoid the child. So if a student is over emotional, they need to think, but initially not about the problem. Let's talk to them about something neutral. Let's take them out into the garden. Let's talk about something that we know they enjoy. So they're able to think, but not about the problem. This will help integrate the brain. We'll connect with them more easily. If a student is over logical, they need to feel and express, but not about the problem. Again, something neutral, something that allows them to feel safe. Then we can solve the problem together. Talking has a biological function. Let's tell stories with children. Let them understand that we can all have these big feelings. We can all feel overwhelmed, and ways to connect and engage so that the student feels safe, so they're able to achieve a balance and self-regulate. Literally walk with the student. Take them into the garden. The more they move, more cortisol will be decreased, and they'll be able to feel safe. Redirect their attention to signs of safety. Use their 5 senses. What can they see, hear, touch, smell, taste around them that brings them to the moment? Slow down their breathing with mindfulness. Let them be aware of their needs. Let's ensure that their students are able to relax, that their sleep is happening, that they're actually exercising. Focus on nutrition, focus on relationships, being out in nature, being with animals, and importantly, having safe people that they can trust and rely on. When little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not to join their chaos. My research is on the student and teacher relationship, exploring behavioural and neuroscience variables that impact upon student and teacher wellbeing. If you'd like to know more information, please feel free to ask me some questions in a moment, but also I have my email address to follow. Our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. Let's work together to ensure that it's a great future for them. I'm now very happy to answer any of your questions, and thank you so much for listening.